Well, I always wanted to be a wildlife photographer, medium for expression of my love for animals, birds, and all nature. I grew up on a cotton farm in Lovington, New Mexico, on the high plains in the southeast corner of the state. My summers were spent outdoors, either working or playing in between work. My mother had a Kodak Instamatic camera that handled all our family photo chores, but there was never spare cash to buy me an SLR or the lens that I would need to capture wildlife images. I scraped my way through college on a tuition scholarship and my summer farmhand earnings. And then I went on to graduate school here in Nevada, where my sole income was a graduate school stipend that was cut in half 9 months out of the year. So there was no money for a camera. Until I got my first real job at Spring Creek Rearing Station with the Nevada Department of Wildlife out near Baker, Nevada. Yes.
Is that you?
No. And I really need, I have to keep, I have to cut. I've got 15 minutes here.
Okay, sorry.
So I spent the first year of my career saving money for my first SLR camera. And around my 1-year anniversary in 1983, I realized that I actually had the money to go ahead and buy it. It had gone so long without that I actually had trouble squeezing the trigger on a purchase. I had studied it for so long that I was afraid my purchase might somehow turn out to be the wrong thing. But I finally made my choice, and I ordered the venerable Canon AE1 and a 50mm lens from Sears and Roebuck, and I was on my way. The Canon was a fine camera, and I loved it. And my early creative period was going really well. But the next purchases I made were from a paradigm of economy and with a big dollop of ignorance. So I supplemented my camera kit, my wildlife photography kit, with a Vivitar 70-210 4.5. Some of you remember that lens. And we also tried to boost it with a Makinon 2X extender, which would cut the Vivitar's light capability in half just immediately when you hooked it up. This was a woeful combination, and it could never get me close enough to the critters to get the photos I wanted without a lot of work and patience that I didn't have. So more or less I gave up on wildlife photography, having convinced myself I didn't have the patience for it. In November of 1985, I married Martha and suddenly had a 12-year-old daughter to help raise. In 1986, in January, I was promoted to my field biologist job in Fallon. And while I still dabbled in some photography as part of my work, my personal camera pretty much collected dust on the shelf while we raised a daughter and scrambled to gain financial stability. But after Darcy graduated college in 1995, we found ourselves with the financial resources to start traveling to more exotic destinations. Our first extracontinental trip was to Hawaii in 2001, followed by Belize and Guatemala in 2002, and then Ecuador and the Galapagos in 2003. I took my Canon on those trips and took the standard tourist photos, with my satisfaction quotient diminishing each trip. Finally, on the Galapagos trip, we went with a group of friends who had all recently bought those little 5-megapixel Fuji digital cameras. Do you remember those? They sort of put digital photography in the hands of the common man. And those Fuji warriors just absolutely kicked my butt when it came to images. The light was poor that year on the islands. It was, it was December and January, and my equipment seemed just interminably old and tired. And it didn't seem like it was working right, that it was focusing. I don't know, it might have been me. wasn't working, and all of my photos were soft, and I just hated my work. So I told my lovely wife that I was not going to go on another overseas trip with a film camera ever again. So we saved again. Finally, my first digital camera purchase was the Nikon Coolpix E8800 8 megapixel 10 power auto zoom. It was an expensive camera in its day at $900. I opted for auto zoom because I wasn't at all sure the second inoculation was going to take, so I didn't think I wanted to fool with interchangeable lenses nor spend the money to get the lens with comparable magnification. So we took the Coolpix on a cruise of the Scottish Hebrides in 2005. And I put it through its paces. Finally, on a bird rock off the coast of the Isle of Staffa, with what seemed to be maybe 100,000 nesting Atlantic puffins, I visualized this photo. And I sat and I waited for all these birds to be looking in one direction. And when I got it, I snapped it off. When I saw what I'd done, I knew I was now back in the wildlife photography game. And this time I was going to grow into it and do all the things right that I did wrong 20 years ago. Now I tell you all this because I want to establish in our minds this morning the power of ambition, how our life's dreams drive us to do amazing things, but they can also cause us to make hasty, ill-considered decisions that can set our artistic development back and require us to overcome the results of our own impatience with growth. So, having captured a few marketable images, I was bent on becoming an overnight sensation, God's new gift to nature photography. I wanted instant quality, instant reputation, and instant success for my new cottage business selling art prints and handling a light load of portrait gigs. The problem was I had to grow financially into the equipment I needed, but even more problematically, I had to grow in technical proficiency as well as artistic vision, and I champed at the bit of time and experience. I remember one time I held a 5-year retrospective at a friend's book signing, and it didn't seem premature to me at all at the time because I was here now and things had changed. Well, you think back on those early years with the D60 combined with the 300 millimeter telephoto combination. That's 11 centy pixels with roughly 6 power magnification. I was getting images like this, but of course I wanted images like this. And I began to crop, and the standard for my cropping procedure was my desired level of emotional impact of the image without regard for the capability of the pixels to support the vision. One day I was fooling around with this image and hit it with a watercolor filter in Photoshop Elements, and it did this. And it just so happened I was studying a book about Winslow Homer's paintings. And by the most serendipitous circumstance, this image caught the look and feel of Homer's brushwork. Homer didn't paint many birds, but if he had, they would have looked just like this. And I was stoked. So now I had a way to bypass the limitations of pixel power by diverting the viewer's appreciation criteria away from a photographic standard to an artistic standard. Then I could get the critter into the heart space of the viewer. I was encouraged by friends on a photo art group in Facebook, and I was now well into my photo art period, which some of you watched me go through and suffer. Some things went pretty well. Some things didn't go so well. and some things were just pretty bizarre. Eventually, I abandoned the ham-handed filters and elements for more sophisticated effects in Nik Color FX Pro. I had so much fun rummaging around in those vintage and nostalgic filters and stacking filters 5 and 6 high. You've all done it, right? And some good imagery ensued. I was receiving positive feedback from friends and patrons. I was selling a little bit. And for me, those were good developmental times. I learned a lot about art and how art works that would inform my photography later. I learned how to apply Nik HDR FX Pro to my images as a single layer with opacity control in Photoshop as my ultimate arbiter. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work so good. In the meantime, I received some very uplifting feedback, recognition with some of my more traditional photographic imagery. This closely cropped coyote won speaker honors at Shooting the West in 2011. And I kept a light hand with it, with the processing, because the image itself held all the magic. The advent of Lightroom into my workflow after an MD Welch class was a huge boost to my technical proficiency and the artistic proficiency that follows knowledgeable image handling. And an HDR class from Ben Wilmore diverted me into the big panoramic landscapes, and it also led me away from Nik HDR to Photomatic's exposure fusion, where I could learn the power of HDR as a contrast tool as opposed to an art medium. So my workflow tightened and I was achieving very satisfactory results. My confidence grew and my artistic values morphed again. I was able to exhibit very large format photo canvases and sold steadily if slowly, but my personal artistic ambitions had largely been satiated and I was in a good place. Which got me to thinking about my earlier work. You know, the beauty of RAW files is your original captures are always there to be reworked with new tools and ideas. Wintertime is a good time to delve back into your archive, see what you used to do, and compare it to what you're doing now. So you can load an old RAW file into Lightroom and work it up as if you'd only shot it yesterday. I got to thinking about art and ambition and paradigm. I began to think about the artistic possibilities achievable within the limitations of an 11 or a 16 megapixel file. And I began to shed the notion that a quality image is only recognizable by how big it will blow up. I became curious about exhibiting at file image size, 9 by 12, 11 by 17. And it reset my awareness for working with older files with an entirely new guiding paradigm. Could a framed 9 by 12 image possibly pack enough artistic punch to move an audience? How would one go about finding out? So I began to look at my old finished outputs with Moose Peterson grinding his teeth in my ear, "Don't cry!" And I was confronted with the pixel stress that I had so glibly ignored and camouflaged over the last 4 or 5 years. I was convicted, and the only thing to do to move forward was to assume a new sense of humility and respect toward the pixel limitations of the image. How to do that? By reevaluating the relationship of the critter with its environment, and reevaluating the artistic potential and contribution of the rest of the frame. It's not that I was going to stop cropping. Rather, I needed to be more disciplined and humble with the crop, with an eye towards preservation of image quality over subject intimacy and in-your-face pop. So who knows what magnification in Photoshop gives you a life-size image at file size? Is it 100%? No. It's 39%. So when you're working on your image, just watch your ruler up at the top of the page. When you get that ruler out there where they're actually in 1 inch intervals, that's how your print is going to operate at file size. So if you print that 11 megapixel file, 9 by 12, that's what it's going to look like. So when you crop, use the crop to strengthen your composition. Move your subject out of the center into one of the, what we've got going here is raw file, old paradigm, new paradigm. So use your crop to move your critter out of center, which is where we usually shoot them because we're all trophy hunters underneath. And direct your image, well, if your crop is not working at 39%, check it. If you see that you're starting to mush your pixels, back it off. Direct your image development toward the enhancement of your entire frame. There's a watercolor camouflage that has soul. And here we're backing it off into a more responsible union with its background. But direct your image development toward the enhancement of the entire frame while preserving the tonality and prominence of your subject. Be optimistic, but be humble, and be disciplined, and take pride in your art.
And you will never find anybody more knowledgeable about any animal in Nevada or elsewhere than Larry Neel. I'm telling you the truth. Thank you so much, Larry.